Hello and welcome. My name is James from the DSO Imager channel, and tonight I thought I would share how I process uh, my moon pictures. Specifically, we had the eclipse on May 15th, 2022, and this is just one of many pictures I took that night, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how I process this. Now, I should mention that I image primarily DSOs, hence the name of the YouTube channel. But occasionally I will dabble in lunar and planetary. And the process that I use to capture and then process this image is the same process I use for planets. So what you see here works great on eclipses. It works fine on regular lunar stuff. And it even works pretty good with like Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. Now the trick with taking pictures like this is it's completely different than DSO imaging. This is where you actually record video as opposed to taking exposures. You record video and then you use software to stack the best frames from the video file. Now there's a number of different programs out there that you can use and different techniques. I use SharpCap to capture this image. I recorded the video. You can either do AVI file or SER file type. I do recommend using the capture mode of 24-bit RGB. I also played with 8-bit and 16-bit, and the 24-bit RGB gave me the best results. Also, while recording the video, ideally you'd have the histogram up, and you want the histogram to be at least over 50%. I try to aim for around 60-70%. On an eclipsing moon, it becomes difficult because the moon does get quite dim. And then, of course, as it comes out of it, or at the start, it's super bright. So you're constantly tweaking the exposure and the gain values. And one other tip for the capturing process, you really want faster the better. Now for this shot I use the my AT115 EDT, and I use the ASI 533 color camera. And to be honest, the 533 in this setup probably wasn't the best camera, because with that AT115 I could only crop the capture using the region of interest just a little bit. So I was basically using the full capacity of that chip. And when you're using the max area of your sensor, there's a limit to how fast you can get frames. And the 533, as great of a camera it is, it's not really it's not very fast. Nothing like an ASI 224 where you can capture over 100 frames per second. So when I was capturing this, I was really in like the 5 or 6 frame per second, which generally isn't good, especially for like planets. But with the moon, I got enough steadiness, and I went with that combination because I wanted to take advantage of the AT115 EDT, so I can get as much of the scope in here as possible, or I should say as much of the moon in here as possible. If I had tried this 533 with my Celestron Edge, I wouldn't have been able to fit the full disc in the frame. Okay, so there's 3 basic programs that I use. I guess really you can, not counting the post-processing stuff. So the first program that I use is this guy right here, PIPP. And what you use PIPP for is you can take the SER movie files and put them in this, and this can convert them to AVI files. There's a couple of other little things that you can tweak in here that can help. If you capture an AVI, the next program that you use is AutoStakkert, and you can take the AVI straight into AutoStakkert, and you don't have to mess around with PIPP. But I actually find that I've gotten better results by running it through PIPP, even if it's an AVI, and then taking it to AutoStakkert to do the stacking. And then once you finish your stacking, you have your stacked image, the next program that we use is Registax. And we use Registax to adjust these wavelets that really does some amazing work with sharpening. And then after that, it's your typical post-processing stuff. So for me, it's usually PixInsight and maybe some tweaking in Photoshop. Alright, so let's minimize that and minimize that. Here's PIPP. Let's open up my file location with all the videos. You can see I started recording video at around 9:44 p.m. and 11:40 p.m. and I ran out of hard drive space, sadly. So that was the last video I got. So I think we'll take a look at this one. Okay, now a couple of tips here. One, this will actually correct if you made a mistake with your Bayer options and your capture software. This actually gives you a chance to correct that. And yeah, here. So I've got it on auto detect, but you can actually modify the Bayer pattern here if you need to. So if you load your video in here and you notice the picture, the moon looks blue or something like that, chances are the Bayer pattern's not correct, and you can tweak that here. Another thing that's pretty handy, and we may or may not need to do this. So if you've gotten the, remember earlier when I was talking about the histogram, if you didn't have the gain and exposure where it needed to be, and your recording is a little bit dark, you can actually adjust these settings right here and boost the gain or the gamma. So just as an example, I'll kick this up a little bit, and then you click over here on update image, and look, see how much brighter it is? So this is a really good option. If your video is really dark, you can use this to kind of make up for that. Play with the gain just to demonstrate. Yeah, so I mean you can see the difference here between the two. So that's pretty handy. And I think I'll just boost them a little bit for this example. Now, I'm not an expert at this program, and so I'm not going to go through and talk about what all these different things are. I can tell you I generally don't mess with most of the stuff here. I will make sure I have output format set to AVI, and you know, you can create a this is all for subdirectory stuff, so that's all fine. And then do processing. It's going to open a window when it completes, and so I'm going to hit start processing, and it's running. And it doesn't take long, as you can see. Alright, there we go. And so there's our AVI file, and we can play this back now. Actually, I can just double click it, and you know, there it goes. Like I mentioned, my frame rate was actually quite low, but unfortunately I managed to get enough decent frames. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's get this stacked. So we're going to take AutoStakkert, and we're just going to drag and drop it in there. This is an image stabilization anchor. If your image like this one's bright enough, you can just leave it there. On the crescent and half moons, I would move this to a different point. And the way you do that is you hit Control and you point to a spot, and it just moves it just like that. So yeah, no big deal. So after you have this image as stabilization anchor, you want to go ahead and for the moon we want surface. I keep it on expand. I'll crop it later, and otherwise I keep everything the same, and I hit analyze. And so now what it's doing is it's analyzing all the frames on this video, and it's going to spit back a chart showing the quality of each frame. Okay, there we go. Now, maybe I'm wrong in how I'm interpreting it, but the way I read this is that it's basically giving this green line, or these lines here, is the quality of each individual frame. And this is showing you that at the 50% mark, this line's your quality. This is telling you that this is at the 50% mark. If I were to say stack 50% of the frames, it's going to stack the frames from this first half of the curve, right? So then this would be 25. So with this, I mean, you really only want the best frames. It doesn't help you to include lower quality frames. So for something like this, I definitely want to go less than 25%. And if I see where this bar is, I would probably, for this, I mean, why don't we try 15%? You know, honestly, I don't remember what I selected when I stacked this picture last time, but we'll try 15%. Now, the other thing is you have to put in reference points. And if you select these, it'll populate this whole image with them. And at least with my computer and my program, if this thing is just full of reference points, sometimes a program chokes out, or it takes my computer a long time to process. And so what I do is I just manually draw, and I draw big boxes. Oops. And it's just left click, drag, left click again, and that's all we're doing here. Now, I guess in theory, the more of these you have, the better, or the more accurate the stacking will be. But like I said, if you put too many in there, it's going to have trouble. At least my system has trouble. And so this is what I've been doing, and it seems to be working. Okay, so we got all our reference points in here. For drizzle, I always keep mine at 1.5, and then I go ahead and hit stack. And I'll go ahead and pause the recording, and I'll come back when it's finished. Okay, so it's finished. And when it finishes, it just automatically creates a folder where the video file was, and we'll pull that open real quick. And so you can see I got a ASP15. That P15 is 15, right? So it's 15%, and it dropped it in there. So let's go ahead and minimize this, and then let's open up my favorite astrophotography editing program, PixInsight. And then let's take our stacked image now and drop it in here. And I do this in PixInsight just to kind of get an idea of where it's looking. Alright, so we got it stacked. I don't see any weird artifacts in there. So what I'm going to do now, we'll just minimize this and minimize PixInsight. We're going to open up Registax, and we're going to take our 15% image and we're going to drop it in Registax. And Registax will always ask you if you want to stretch intensity levels. I say no because in this case it's bright enough. Now, the way Registax works and what we're wanting to do with it is basically adjust these wavelet functions here. And this is what really sharpens things up in the image. Now what happens is there's like an area here in the center that's like a preview. And so when you make adjustments here, it only affects this preview area. And then if you reached a point that you're satisfied with, or you want to see how it looks on the whole image, you click the do all. Now sometimes, especially if you're running like a half a moon or whatever, the processing area may be in a dark spot. And so you can actually move it by literally dragging and dropping it. It's not, at least I found it's not the easiest, or doesn't work too smoothly, but I mean it works well enough. And so you can drag this area into a spot that's illuminated enough so that you can see exactly what you're doing. And now we're going to adjust this. So this first layer is the one that usually gets most of the work. And I don't know if you could tell, but it did sharpen up this area in here. And so we'll drag these out. These lower ones here, what I have found is that it is really easy to overcook an image if you go too far on that. Now you can see some graininess there, and that is pretty normal. It has a denoise option, but with modern denoise software, things like Topaz Denoise or the Noise Exterminator in PixInsight do a really good job at handling the noise. So at least for these images, I haven't messed around with the denoise functions here. But to demonstrate, right, so you have these sliders, but then you also have these little boxes for sharpening denoise. So I'll go ahead and increment up this first layer, and you can see the sharpening impact. And then if you want, you can try to up the denoise, and it kind of takes the edge off of the sharpness. But I feel like I went too far with that, so I'm dialing it back. And let's do a do all. Oops, not save. Cancel. Do all. And now it's going to tile the changes across, right? You see the progress bar down here. And you can see it doing its thing. And so you do that and you kind of look around. It's important to look around because, especially with a lot of contrasty areas, it may look great in your preview area, but it may do some weird things outside the preview. So we're grainy, but it's done a lot to improve the sharpness. But let's see if we can push it a little bit more. Right, and this is all a subjective thing. I try to keep things looking natural without overcooking them. If you push too much sharpness, things start to look a little strange. But again, I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder, right? This is where the art in astrophotography comes into play. It's how far you want to push things. I mean, I think this looks pretty good. It's a little maybe too grainy. But, I mean, I'm just doing a demonstration here. So let's run with this. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm just going to save it in the same folder. I'll usually just put like, Regi1. That way I know that this has been through Registax. Okay, and now we'll put this into PixInsight, and we'll do a comparison. All right. Can you see a difference? It's quite noticeable, isn't it? Yeah, the wavelets in Registax really does some amazing work. So, I mean, that's the gist of it as far as processing the video files that you capture. So now we're into just a typical post-processing. A word on the stars. You see some pictures out there with really nice star fields behind the moon. So that would be a composite image. And if I was smart and had remembered correctly, I would have taken maybe some traditional longish exposure single shots with the camera to capture the stars, and then overlay the moon on top of the star field. Because when you do recordings like this, the stars, I've got the mount set for lunar tracking, and so the stars are moving at a different rate versus the moon, and so the stars don't do too well. And generally what I would do here is just, blot them out with clone stamp or healing brush or something. Just remove them. So if I had that separate image, slightly longer exposure with the star field, I can put that in there and get the nice star field. Also, you notice I have some hot pixels in there. It is possible in SharpCap to load dark frames and flat frames while you record video, which I didn't do, and so I'll just use a healing stamp to get rid of these hot pixels. Alright, so what's next? Well, we can use histogram, especially if your image is still dark or you got a really dark part of the moon that you want to pull out. Histogram is definitely something that you can use. Right, just grab that middle pointer and pull it in a little bit. Right, now you want to be careful. You don't want to overdo it, right? Because now this area is too bright and you've destroyed all the contrast in here. I mean, I guess you could try to fix that with curves. And again, this is all basically season to taste stuff. So, I mean, I guess for this one, I'll just leave it like this, just to give the globe a little bit of a pop against that black background. All right, and then we'll pull out our curves. All right, and we can do an initial contrast adjustment. All right, you can even do a range mask if you want. I don't always do range masks on something like this, but to give you an idea of how you could do it. Right, because one area is darker than the other, and so maybe you want to use curves to improve the contrast in one area without impacting the other area. Right, so I mean, like these areas here are a little bit brighter than the area right below it, so maybe we can just adjust this. And that way we're getting a little bit of contrast in there without making this area down here darker. Right, that's the idea there. I mean, let's see, where's that mask? Okay, it's covering that, so now we can reverse the mask. I mean, you know, like I said, you don't have to use the mask. It's just different ways of working it. So what if I want to make this spot a little bit darker than that spot? Right, so pull that down a little bit, pull that up. Right, and it creates a little bit of difference here. And then we can maybe pull the whole thing up a little bit because we're darkening that area too much. All right, let's see. Yeah, let's bring this back up. See, so if you got the mask in place and you go too bright, you can kind of see where that mask line is. So you definitely want to be aware of that. Don't get tunnel vision focusing on this and not seeing how the rest of the area is being impacted. So I think we'll leave it at this for now. Let's remove the mask. How about some saturation? Yeah, I mean, with boosting saturation a little bit, you get some nice gold in the brighter areas. I mean, you don't want to do too much, right? I mean that actually, yeah, that's too much. Now the other thing is, you know, one-shot color camera, green is a strong signal. Maybe there's too much green in here. We can get an idea of what it looks like if we try to pull some green out. I mean, you don't want to take too much and then turn this into this, you know, unnatural looking red. What I find for something like this, the SCNR tool actually works really well because it does a better balance than just using curves. Now we don't want to get all the green out, but you can experiment. So roughly half. It's almost unnoticeable here. Let's try a little bit more. Yeah, it's really subtle, but I like the tint that I'm getting there a little bit more. Now, it may not be too evident, but there are stacking artifacts along the edges. Because remember, with with AutoStakkert, we told it to expand. So let's go ahead and crop. And how about let me show you how to use clone stamp to take care of these. I mean, when I processed the image the first time around, I used a healing brush in Photoshop, but clone stamp is something we can use. Oh, gotta close dynamic crop first. Alright, so click in the picture, hold control, click again, lift up on control, click again, and so where you see the X is what it's going to clone to the target. And the radius is how big the impact is, right? So there. I mean, this is easy, right? We're just stamping out the stars and the hot pixels. So any kind of weird artifacts, we're just going to get rid of. I'll hit the ones in the moon in a second here. I'll make a smaller circle. Now, I do think Healing Brush does a better job here, but again, I'll just use a clone stamp. There you go. So, I mean, you can see it creates its own artifact. Now, these hot pixels are tiny, and this is a big target, so I don't think it's going to be noticeable at all when we zoom out. Yeah, see that one? If I were processing this as a keeper, I wouldn't accept that, but in the interest of time, I think this video is getting long enough. We'll just accept it. This is mostly to give everyone an idea of what you can do with it. Alright, so when you get to a point that you're finished, you got to click the execute. If you hit this, it'll cancel everything you clicked on. Alright. Alright, so the last thing I'll show you basically is going to be noise reduction. And like I said, the noise exterminator really works great. I'll go ahead and pause the recording and come back when it's finished. Yeah, I really need to get GPU support enabled because it'll be so much faster with it. But anyway, how's that look? A tiny little bit of grain in there still, but boy, that looks a lot smoother than it did before. Here's the before and the after. Maybe it's a little bit too much. I mean, again, it's another one of those season the taste. It is interesting how you can almost see a little bit more detail without the grain in the way. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, it didn't really take that long to do. Running it through PIPP and then AutoStakkert and then uh, Registax. I mean, those three programs, they may seem intimidating, but as you saw, you can just kind of run through them relatively quickly. And then after that, it's processing it in PixInsight. And I kind of rushed through this processing. Let's see how it looks compared to this one. I mean, it's pretty close. You can tell that I clearly spent more time. Oh yeah, we have to rotate and flip this. But anyway, I hope this gave everyone a good idea of how to do this. And like I said, this works really well on planets too, especially Jupiter and Mars and Saturn. So, any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in there. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe and check out some of the other stuff on my channel. Again, I'm primarily DSO, but I do occasionally dabble on planets and the moon. Hoping everyone gets some clear skies, and have a good evening.